The thing about the Atlantic Ocean in early hurricane season is that it's like a pot of water on a stove with a faulty knob. It can sit there, placid and blue, for weeks. Then, one day, for reasons of atmospheric physics that most people find insufferably boring, someone cranks that knob to high, and what starts as a tiny bubble of heat and moisture off the coast of Senegal can, with enough time and open water, turn into a monster that will peel the roof off your house. My job, my passion, really, is to spot the bubble. "See that?" I said, pointing a laser at the largest of my 4 monitors. The screen was a chaotic swirl of color-coded data overlaid on a satellite map of the eastern Atlantic. "Right there. That little raspberry-colored swirl?" On the other side of the video call, 3 faces squinted at their own screens. They were my people, the cyclone chasers. Dave, a retired math teacher from Omaha. Chloe, a grad student at MIT who was probably smarter than all of us combined. And Marcus, a shipping logistics guy from Houston who had the practical, on-the-ground knowledge. "The GFS model has that dissolving in 48 hours, Dave said, his voice a skeptical rumble. "Says it's running into a wall of Saharan dust." The GFS model also thought my last fantasy football team was a championship contender, I shot back. "I'm telling you, look at the sea surface temperature anomalies. That water is bath water. And the dust layer is thinner than the plot of a reality TV show. This thing has legs." I called it a pimple on the Atlantic's backside, a low-pressure system that looked like nothing. But my equipment, my beautiful, glorious, and absurdly expensive equipment, was telling me a different story. It was telling me this pimple had the potential to grow into a raging boil. My pride and joy, the heart of my entire operation, hummed quietly in my backyard. I called it the Harbinger. It was a 3-meter, custom-built satellite dish. It wasn't for watching pirated soccer matches or premium movie channels. It was my private gateway to the heavens. The Harbinger pulled down raw, uncompressed, unfiltered data from a specific flock of NOAA and European Space Agency satellites. The kind of pure, high-resolution data that the public-facing models wouldn't get for hours, if at all. It was the difference between reading a book and having the author whisper the plot twists in your ear ahead of time. I'd sunk a significant chunk of my early retirement buyout from the aerospace firm into it, and it was worth every penny. It allowed me to run my own forecast models, feeding my small but respected blog, Frank's Forecasts. I wasn't a prepper, hoarding canned beans and ammo. I was a preparer. I believed in data, not drama. And unfortunately, I lived in Whispering Palms Estates, a place where the only thing more rigidly controlled than the drama was the color palette. Our Florida community was a monument to beige. The houses were beige, the fences were beige. The curbs were a slightly different HOA-approved shade of beige. Individuality was a weed to be plucked with extreme prejudice, and the head gardener, the Grand Inquisitor of all things non-beige, was Brenda Wexler. I was outside, meticulously trimming my hibiscus hedge, making sure none of the leaves were displaying what Bylaw 19B called excessive gloss, when I felt her presence. It was a disturbance in the force, a sudden drop in ambient joy. I looked up to see her electric golf cart whisper to a stop at the end of my driveway. She piloted it with the silent, menacing grace of a shark. "Frank," she said. Her voice was as crisp as a freshly printed violation notice. "Brenda!" She pointed a perfectly manicured finger toward a planter box by my front door. "The geraniums." I looked at them. They were red. They looked to my untrained eye like flowers. "They're looking a bit vibrant," she continued, her lips pursed in disapproval. "The approved shade in the spring planting guide is pastel pink petal." "That," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, is Flagrant Red Fury. Flagrant Red Fury, I thought. Sounds like a great name for the storm I'm tracking, or for Brenda's eventual autobiography. Right, I said aloud, forcing a smile that felt like it might crack my face. Flagrant Red. My apologies. I'll tone them down. Wouldn't want to trigger a market crash with my aggressive floral choices. Her eyes, cold and calculating, drifted past me. They rose over the top of my 6-foot privacy fence, and I saw them lock onto the upper curve of the Harbinger. It was just a sliver of white, barely visible, but to Brenda it might as well have been a middle finger painted in neon orange. A tiny, almost imperceptible tisk sound escaped her lips. She didn't say another word. She just put the golf cart in gear and silently rolled away, leaving me with the distinct feeling that I had just appeared on a hit list. I knew that look. It was the look that preceded a certified letter. The letter arrived exactly 1 week later, nestled in my approved regulation-size mailbox. The envelope was a stern shade of manila. Inside, the letterhead for the Whispering Palms Estates Homeowners Association was embossed with an almost aggressive level of quality. Notice of violation. It stated, in no uncertain terms, that I was in breach of Bylaw 17, Section C, Paragraph 4. No satellite dishes, aerials, or similar antenna structures exceeding 1 meter in diameter are permitted to be installed on any lot. I was given 14 days to remediate the violation. That is, to tear down my $10,000 piece of specialized scientific equipment. I laughed. I actually laughed out loud. It was absurd. I sat down at my computer, a smirk playing on my lips, and typed out a reply. It was a masterpiece of polite, passive-aggressive trolling. Dear Brenda and the Architectural Review Committee, thank you for your letter regarding the structure in my backyard. I believe there may be a misunderstanding. The equipment in question is not a satellite dish in the consumer sense, as defined by the bylaw, which is clearly intended to regulate television reception devices. What I have installed is a specialized meteorological data acquisition array. I then attached the full 30-page technical specification PDF for the Harbinger, complete with C-band frequency charts, signal-to-noise ratio tables, and diagrams of its parabolic reflector geometry. I knew for a fact she wouldn't understand a single word. I ended the email with a flourish. I trust this clarifies the matter and confirms my full compliance with the spirit and letter of the HOA covenants, conditions, and restrictions. Best, Frank Miller, Lot 72. Her response was not an email. It was another letter, delivered by hand to my front door 2 days later. This one was in a blood-red envelope. It contained a copy of my own email, the words Meteorological Data Acquisition Array circled in red pen. Beside it, she had written in sharp, angry script, "It's a dish." The letter went on to state that the Architectural Review Committee had reviewed my appeal and had determined that my equipment was, for all aesthetic intents and purposes, a dish. The 14-day countdown was still in effect. A fine of $100 per day would be levied immediately thereafter. I picked up my phone and called my friend Dave, the retired math teacher from the Cyclone Chasers. "You're not going to believe this," I said, pacing my office. "She's calling it an aesthetic equivalent of a dish." "A what?" "An aesthetic equivalent. Dave, that's insane. That's like saying a great white shark is the aesthetic equivalent of a dolphin because they both have fins and live in the ocean. One is a precision-engineered marvel of science, and the other is used to watch reality shows about housewives throwing wine at each other." "You need to talk to her, Frank. Reason with her." "Reason with Brenda? Dave, you don't reason with a force of nature, and she's a Category 5. But I had to try. I found her at the community pool, where she was using a tape measure to ensure the lounge chairs were spaced exactly 36 inches apart, as per the poolside furnishings mandate. "Brenda," I started, trying to sound as non-confrontational as possible. "Can we please just talk about this for a second? The dish isn't an eyesore. It's important. It's a tool. It tracks severe weather. With hurricane season starting, it could be a real benefit to the whole community. An early warning system." She straightened up, her eyes narrowing. "The benefit to the community, Frank, is uniform property values and a pleasing visual landscape free of unsightly metallic clutter. We have the Weather Channel for our early warnings." "The bylaws," she said, patting a thick 3-ring binder she carried with her everywhere, "are the only umbrella we need here." And that's when I saw it. It wasn't about the rule. It wasn't about the aesthetics. It was about the challenge. My dish was a monument to something she couldn't control, a piece of my world that refused to conform to hers. This wasn't an enforcement action. It was a personal crusade. Over the next week, the storm I'd nicknamed Flagrant Red Fury was officially designated Tropical Storm Leo. The national news forecasts, the ones Brenda relied on, were all sunshine and rainbows. Leo is expected to encounter significant wind shear and curve harmlessly out into the deep Atlantic, a meteorologist with impossibly white teeth chirped. But my data from the Harbinger was telling me a different story. The wind shear was a mirage. The sea temperatures were spiking. And a massive high-pressure ridge was building over the eastern seaboard, a solid wall of air that would act like a bowling alley bumper, preventing any northward turn. Leo wasn't going out to sea. It was being funneled directly toward the Florida coast. I published a post on my blog titled, "Official Forecasts Are Sipping Margaritas. Leo Has Other Plans." It got a lot of traction in my little community of weather nerds. But here in Whispering Palms, I was just the guy with the illegal dish. The 14-day deadline came and went. I woke up on the 15th day, made my coffee, and sat down at my command center. The screens were frozen. The data feeds were dead. In the top corner of my main monitor, a single, horrifying message blinked in stark red letters. "Signal lost." My blood ran cold. I checked the internal connections, rebooted the servers. Nothing. My heart pounding, I walked out my back door and into the humid morning air. And there it was. The main coaxial and fiber optic data lines running from the base of the Harbinger to the conduit on my house had been cut. Not frayed, not chewed by a squirrel. They had been snipped, perfectly, professionally, and with a chilling degree of precision. Lying on the ground near the severed ends, held down by a perfectly smooth gray river rock, was a laminated card. It was from the HOA. Final notice: the unapproved structure has been deactivated as per Bylaw 28, Section A, Remediation of Persistent Violations. Please contact the office during business hours to schedule its complete removal. I stared at the severed cables, the instruments of my passion and my profession, lying uselessly in the dew-kissed grass. Then I looked up at the sky, where a few high, wispy cirrus clouds, the very first outer tendrils of a distant hurricane, were beginning to paint the horizon. Hurricane Leo had just been upgraded to a Category 1, and Brenda Wexler had just gouged out my eyes. My first call was to the police. I was shaking with a rage so pure it felt like a religious experience. "Vandalism! Destruction of private property!" I yelled into the phone, probably a little too loudly. 2 officers arrived about 20 minutes later. The younger one, Officer Riley, was all spit polish and by-the-book seriousness. The older one, Officer Davis, had the weary, 1,000-yard stare of a man who had seen every possible flavor of suburban lunacy. I led them to the backyard, my own personal crime scene. I pointed at the severed cables with a trembling finger. "Right there! She admitted it! She left a note!" Officer Davis knelt, looked at the clean cut, then at the laminated card. He read it, sighed, and stood up, brushing his knees. "So let me get this straight," he said, his voice flat. "The Homeowners Association, of which you are a paying member?" "Reluctantly," I muttered. "So, sent you multiple written notices about this dish, which, according to the rules you agreed to when you bought the house, is a violation." "It's not a dish. It's a meteorological—" "Sir," he cut me off gently, "they sent you notices. You didn't comply, so they disabled it?" "They destroyed my property," I sputtered. "That's a $10,000 system. The fiber optic line alone is a custom job." "And they left a note admitting to it," Davis finished, rubbing the back of his neck. "Sir, look, I get that you're mad, but this isn't a criminal matter. It's a civil one. They didn't sneak in here in ski masks. They're claiming they acted under the authority of a contract you both signed. Your recourse here isn't to file a police report. It's to sue them in civil court." "Sue them? There's a hurricane the size of Texas heading this way, and you want me to file paperwork?" "I'm sorry, sir," Officer Riley chimed in, his notepad remaining stubbornly empty. "But he's right. It's a dispute. We can't arrest someone for enforcing the rules of their club." They left me there, standing in my yard, choking on my own impotent fury. The system wasn't just failing me. It was actively protecting the person who had just crippled me. Brenda hadn't just cut my cables. She had done it under the color of law. My next call was to the only person in the state who could possibly fix this. Gus. He was a grizzled, beer-bellied technician who had helped me with the initial installation. He was a master of his craft, with a vocabulary that was 50% technical jargon and 50% creative profanity, most of it directed at HOAs. "Gus, it's Frank Miller. I've got a situation." He was at my house within the hour. He took one look at the severed cables and let out a long, low whistle. "Who, boy?" he said, squatting down for a closer look. "She didn't just snip it, Frankie. She did it clean. Used a proper fiber cleaver. This wasn't some gardener with a pair of shears. This was surgical." He held up the delicate, hair-thin strand of glass fiber. "This is your problem right here. That's a single-mode fiber optic data line. I can't just twist that back together and wrap it in electrical tape. That's like trying to do brain surgery with a butter knife." "So what do we do?" I asked, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. "I need to fusion splice it, and the fitting she cut off at the conduit end. It's a custom job. I need to order a specific coupling unit. It's a German make. Zeiss." "Germany?" My voice cracked. "How long will that take, Gus?" He stood up, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Best case? If I get the order in right now and they overnight it, maybe a week. But with international shipping, if that thing gets held up in customs for even a day, who knows? Could be 2 weeks." He looked around nervously. "And that's assuming I can even work here. This HOA of yours. They sound like the kind of people who'd have me towed and charged with trespassing if I set my toolbox down on the wrong blade of grass." A week, 2 weeks. I looked at my phone. Hurricane Leo was now a strong Category 2, churning through the Caribbean. The official forecast track had finally started to nudge westward, just a little. The TV meteorologists were starting to hedge their bets, using weasel words like "a slight chance" and "out of an abundance of caution." They were still promising a graceful northward turn, but their voices lacked the conviction of a few days ago. I had to do something. I couldn't just sit here blind while a buzzsaw approached. I decided to take the fight to the enemy's home turf, the monthly HOA meeting. The community clubhouse smelled of lemon-scented cleaner and simmering resentment. I came prepared with a laptop and a thumb drive, armed with charts, data, and a desperate hope that I could appeal to my neighbor's latent sense of self-preservation. The meeting was a masterclass in petty grievances. A man with a handlebar mustache gave a 10-minute presentation, complete with a slideshow, on the scourge of improper trash can placement on Collection Day. A woman stood up to complain that the community squirrels were becoming unacceptably aggressive. It was surreal. Finally, Brenda called my name. "Frank Miller, you have 3 minutes." I strode to the front, plugged my laptop into the projector, and threw my most terrifying chart onto the screen. It was my own model, the one based on the last data the Harbinger had received. It showed Leo not turning north, but taking a hard right hook directly into our stretch of coastline. "Folks," I began, my voice tight, "my name is Frank Miller. Some of you know I'm a meteorologist. That satellite dish the HOA just illegally destroyed?" "Allegedly destroyed," Brenda cut in smoothly from her seat at the head table. "And the matter is under civil review?" I ignored her. "That dish is not for television. It provides me with highly accurate, real-time data on storm systems. The official forecasts you're seeing on TV are lagging. They're hopeful. My data is not. This, storm, Hurricane Leo, is not turning north. The conditions are perfect for rapid intensification, and a high-pressure system is going to steer it directly into us. We need to be preparing. Now." A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. I saw a flicker of concern on 1 or 2 faces. I had them. But I had underestimated Brenda. She let the silence hang for a beat, then stood up, a placid smile on her face. "Thank you, Frank, for your amateur weather report," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "That was very dramatic. Now, as fascinating as that is, we are here to discuss official HOA business. And on that topic," she said, picking up a piece of paper from her desk, "we have the matter of Mr. Miller's outstanding fines for the now deactivated Bylaw 17 violation. With the daily penalty, the total currently stands at $800. Frank, would you like to settle that now, or shall we place a lien on your property?" The air went out of the room. In 10 seconds, she had transformed me from Paul Revere into a common deadbeat. My neighbor's expressions shifted from concern to mild contempt. I was no longer a potential savior. I was just the guy who didn't want to pay his fines. The squirrel guy shot me a dirty look. I stood there, utterly humiliated, as she moved on to the next agenda item. A heated debate over whether petunias were a suitable substitute for impatiens in the common area flower beds. I packed up my laptop and walked out without another word. The next day, Leo exploded. It underwent rapid intensification just as my last bits of data had predicted. It jumped from a Category 2 to a raging Category 3 in less than 12 hours. It was a major hurricane. And then it started to wobble. Not north, west, northwest. The tone on the Weather Channel changed from cautious optimism to barely concealed panic. "A sudden and unexpected change in the storm's track," a grim-faced meteorologist announced, pointing to a new projected cone of uncertainty that had shifted 100 miles west, painting our entire coastline in a bullseye of red. "Unexpected my ass!" I screamed at the television, throwing a foam stress ball so hard it bounced off the wall and knocked over a lamp. I was out of time. The part from Germany was a fantasy. Gus had mentioned in passing a crazy, temporary, dirty fix. A complex bypass splice that he wouldn't recommend. Something that could fry the delicate processors but might work for a few hours if done perfectly. He said he wouldn't dare try it himself, but he'd told me the theory, and I had the tools. That night, under the cover of a sky now thick with clouds, I began my clandestine mission. Dressed in black jeans and a black hoodie, I army-crawled through my own backyard like a low-budget spy. I had a tiny booklight clipped to my collar, its beam bobbing nervously as I fumbled with the delicate wires inside the conduit box. My hands were slick with sweat. The wind was picking up, rustling the palm trees with a sound like tearing silk. A neighbor's cat, a fluffy monster named Bartholomew, chose that exact moment to leap onto the fence above me with a guttural yowl. I jumped, my hand jerking, and a crucial microscopic screw popped out of the fitting and vanished into the thick St. Augustine grass. I was on my hands and knees, frantically patting the lawn like a madman, when it happened. Click, whoom. My entire backyard, and half of my neighbors, was instantly bathed in the blinding, sterile glare of a high-powered floodlight. I froze, like a raccoon caught robbing a trash can. Standing on her back patio, silhouetted against her kitchen light like some avenging angel of conformity, was Brenda. She was wearing a silk robe, her hair in perfect curlers, and she had her phone pressed to her ear. "Yes, officer? It's Brenda Wexler, Lot 71, she said, her voice carrying clearly across the yard. "It's Frank Miller again. From Lot 72? Yes, that's the one. He's out here, tampering with the structure again." I closed my eyes and slumped against the side of my house. A few moments later, the familiar headlights of a police cruiser swept down the street. Officers Riley and Davis returned, and this time they looked genuinely annoyed. They couldn't arrest me for fixing my own property on my own property, but they could, and did, give me a very stern, official warning for trespassing on the 5-foot common area easement that ran along my back fence, which is precisely where the main HOA junction box was located. Brenda watched the entire exchange from her patio, a small, triumphant smirk on her face. As the cops drove away, she gave me a final, dismissive look, turned, and went back inside her perfect beige house. It was my lowest point, utterly and completely defeated. As I gathered my tools in shame, I felt the first drop of rain on my cheek, then another. The first outer bands of Hurricane Leo had arrived. There's no sound on Earth like a major hurricane making landfall. It's not just wind, it's a physical presence, a weight that presses in on you from all sides. It's a symphony of terror conducted by a lunatic. First comes the overture, the rising shriek of the wind through the eaves, a sound that starts as a whistle and escalates into a full-throated, demonic scream. Then the percussion section joins in, the hard, horizontal sleet of rain hitting the boarded-up windows like a million tiny fists. My whole house, which I'd always considered a sturdy fortress, groaned under the assault. The walls trembled. The roof timbers creaked like the hull of an old ship in a gale. Sometime around 2 a.m., a nearby transformer exploded with a brilliant blue-green flash that lit up the neighborhood for a split second, followed by an immediate, plunging darkness. The power was gone. My generator kicked on with a reassuring roar, but outside, the world had been reduced to sound and fury. I was sitting in my command center, my screens now powered by the generator but still mockingly blank. I had my phone, my only link to the outside world, and I was watching the public data feeds. They were chaotic, a mess of conflicting reports and panicked news anchors. I felt like a fighter pilot who'd had his cockpit canopy painted black. I was flying blind, listening to the sounds of my world being torn apart and knowing with a sickening certainty that I had seen it coming. I had told them so, and the thought brought me no satisfaction at all, only a profound, hollow ache. I couldn't help but picture Brenda, alone in her pristine castle across the street. Her meticulously chosen wind chimes, I imagined, had probably been ripped from their hooks and were now halfway to Alabama. Her world of perfect right angles and approved color palettes was being violated by a force that didn't give a damn about the bylaws. Then came a sound that rose above the constant roar of the wind. It was a deep, guttural crack, like a giant bone snapping, followed by a ground-shaking thump that I felt through the soles of my feet. I knew that sound. It was the sound of a very large tree giving up in the terrifying, wind-whipped darkness of her living room. Brenda Wexler's illusion of control finally shattered. The tree, the ancient, majestic live oak in her front yard, was gone. It was a protected tree, according to the city, the centerpiece of her prize-winning landscaping. She had fought for 2 years to prevent a neighbor from trimming a branch that hung over his roof, citing its historical significance. Now, that same tree had split down the middle. A limb the size of a small car had fallen directly onto her house, crushing the roof of her garage and the brand-new Lexus she kept parked inside. Her meticulously manicured lawn was a churning lake of mud and debris. The power was out. The wind was trying to peel the shingles off her roof one by one. And then she heard it. A drip, then another. Drip, 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 water. It was coming from the crystal chandelier in her foyer. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. She was alone. Her perfect house was breaking. In the maelstrom of fear and noise, a memory surfaced. Frank Miller, standing at the front of the clubhouse, pointing at a map. His crazy, alarmist map. His warning. Her hands shaking, she fumbled for her cell phone. By some miracle, it had 1 bar of service. Her fingers flew across the screen, pulling up the HOA directory. She found his name. And she made the call she had sworn to a pantheon of suburban gods she would never, ever make. My phone buzzed against the desk, its vibration almost lost in the din. I saw the caller ID, Brenda Wexler. For a second, I thought about letting it go to voicemail. Let the queen rot in her crumbling castle. It would be justice. But curiosity, or maybe some vestigial scrap of human decency, won out. I answered. The connection was terrible, a vortex of static and wind. "Frank!" she screamed over the roar. "It's Brenda Wexler!" I leaned back in my chair, took a slow sip of my lukewarm coffee, and replied in the calmest, most deadpan voice I could muster. "Brenda, to what do I owe the pleasure? Did I forget to separate my recyclables?" There was a choked sob on the other end. "My roof!" she shrieked, her voice cracking with terror. "A tree, it fell on my roof! Water is coming in! Frank, what do I do? The news said it would turn north!" I let the silence hang for a long moment. I let her dangle in it, in the world she had created, where the official story was the only one that mattered. Then, I sighed. "I know," I said, my tone shifting. The snark was gone, replaced by the calm authority of the expert. This was my domain now. "Okay, Brenda, listen to me. Where are you right now?" "My living room." "Get out of the living room. Get to the most interior room you have. A bathroom, a walk-in closet, no windows. Do you understand?" "Yes, okay." "Take towels. Put them down by the door. Do you have a bucket, a trash can, anything?" I think so." "Good. Stay in that room. Stay away from the windows. Stay away from anything that looks like it's attached to the roof. Don't go into the garage. The eye wall is about to pass over. That's the strongest part of the storm. It's going to get worse before it gets better. Do you understand me, Brenda?" "Yes," she whispered, her voice small and childlike. "Yes, I understand." "Good," I said. "Stay on the line if you can." For the next hour, as the hurricane raged, I became her lifeline, a calm voice of data and reason in the chaotic darkness. The rule breaker had become the expert. The neighborhood pariah had become her only hope. The dawn broke over a scene of absolute devastation. When the wind finally subsided to a dull roar and the sky lightened to a bruised, apocalyptic gray, we emerged. We were like survivors of a shipwreck, blinking in the strange new light. Whispering Palms Estates was gone. The meticulously planned community had been wiped clean, returned to a primal state of mud and chaos. Fences were obliterated. Manicured lawns were buried under a thick sludge of leaves and debris. Every other house wore a blue tarp, like a bandage. But something else had emerged, too. Community. For the first time since I'd moved in, my neighborhood felt like a neighborhood. People were out in the street, checking on each other. A guy I only knew as the loud truck guy was using his undamaged F-150 and a tow chain to pull a massive fallen palm tree off an elderly couple's driveway. The man who had complained about the aggressive squirrels was running an extension cord from his generator to a neighbor's house so they could power their refrigerator. The petty rules, the aesthetic mandates, the entire fragile ecosystem of suburban grievance had been washed away by the storm. All that was left was people. Helping people. I was surveying the damage to my own house, a few lost shingles, a battered fence, but structurally sound thanks to my own obsessive preparations, when I saw her. Brenda. She was standing by the wreckage of her garage, a gaping hole in the roof above the crumpled metal of her Lexus. She looked small, lost, and utterly defeated. She saw me and started walking over. There was no golf cart, no binder, no air of authority. Just a woman in muddy rain boots, her perfect hair plastered to her forehead. She stopped in front of me, looking at the ground. "The water," she said, her voice quiet. "It came in right where you said it would. The ceiling in the living room collapsed about 10 minutes after I got into the bathroom." I nodded slowly. That was the eye wall. The uplift is strongest on the northern side. She finally looked up, and her eyes were filled with something I had never seen before. Humility. I'm sorry, Frank," she said, the words coming out in a rush. "About your dish, about the fines, about everything. I was wrong." It wasn't a grudging admission. It was a genuine, heartfelt apology. The hurricane hadn't just destroyed her house, it had demolished her certainty. The Karen had been exorcised by 150-mile-per-hour winds. 2 months later, the neighborhood was a cacophony of hammers, saws, and the beep-beep-beep of backing trucks. Blue tarps were still the dominant architectural feature, but progress was being made. In my backyard, Gus the contractor was tightening the last bolt on a brand-new piece of equipment. It was bigger, shinier, and more powerful than its predecessor. "There she is, Frankie," Gus said, wiping his greasy hands on a rag and admiring his work. "The Harbinger 2.0. This baby can pull data from geostationary orbit and tell you what a seagull over the Azores had for breakfast." I heard a soft footstep on the grass behind me. I turned. It was Brenda. She was holding a small plate covered in plastic wrap. "Is that the new one?" she asked, her eyes on the magnificent white dish. "Yep," I said. "State of the art. Should give us a 5-day jump on the next unexpected storm." She nodded, a flicker of the old fear in her eyes. She held out the plate. "I made lemon bars." I took them. "Thank you, Brenda." She stood there for a moment, shifting her weight, looking from the dish to me and back again. "Frank," she said finally, Can you show me how it works? For real this time." A slow smile spread across my face. It was the first time I think I'd ever genuinely smiled at her. "Yeah, Brenda," I said. "I can do that." I led her through the back door and into my command center. I pulled up a chair for her in front of the main monitor, which was alive with the beautiful, chaotic dance of global weather patterns. I pointed to a swirl of color off the coast of Africa, a tiny, insignificant bubble of heat and moisture. "Okay," I began. "So it all starts right here." She leaned forward, her eyes wide with a newfound, respectful curiosity. The Grand Inquisitor of Beige was gone. In her place was just my neighbor, my student. And for the first time, I felt like I was finally home.